The crack of a flawless shot snapped through the Summit Marksman Society, clean and confident, followed by applause so loud it felt rehearsed, the kind of applause money learns to make when it's congratulating itself. And at the center of that little thunderstorm stood Blake Hawthorne, tan, polished, untouchable, lowering a custom-built rifle like a celebrity setting down a microphone, smiling the easy smile of a man who has never had to wonder if he belongs in the room, because the room was built around him, around his oil family checks, his sponsor deals with Raven Arms, his trophies, his 5 national titles, his Olympic gold, the whole myth of greatness that looks a lot like privilege when you stand close enough to smell it. And then, near the entrance, like a page torn out of a different book, stood Emma Hart, 35, wearing a plain blue cardigan and department store jeans, clutching a worn leather purse the way you clutch something that still remembers who you used to be, her hair pulled back without drama, her shoes sensible, her presence so quiet that the receptionist's eyes slid over her and almost didn't come back, as if Emma was a smudge on the glass instead of a person with a pulse. "Excuse me," Emma said softly, because grief teaches you to speak like you're not allowed to take up space. "I'd like to register for today's open practice." The receptionist's smile stayed in place while the warmth fell out of it, her gaze traveling downward like a silent inspection, and she replied, "Membership cards only." Emma breathed in, slow, steady, and produced a crinkled envelope. "I have a day pass." It was a gift. That was when Blake Hawthorne noticed her, not because he was curious, but because people like him are trained to detect anything that disrupts the aesthetic of their world, and he called out across the club with a laugh that landed like a slap. Well, looks like somebody took a wrong turn on the way to a discount store," and his friends chuckled on cue. Bright teeth, expensive jackets, the whole chorus of comfortable cruelty. The manager, Rebecca Klein, a former competitor with the posture of someone who's had to earn her skill the hard way, frowned at Blake's comment. But the silence she kept was the silence a workplace teaches you, the silence that says, "I need this job more than I need this moment." Emma didn't argue. She didn't perform outrage. She simply walked to the far end of the basic range like a woman who had learned that sometimes survival looks like not reacting. She set her purse down, unwrapped a cloth bundle, and revealed a standard, serviceable handgun. Nothing flashy, nothing engraved, nothing built to impress strangers, and the crowd's interest sharpened because bullies love a stage. $10 says she can't hit the target, someone joked. Blake lifted his chin, eyes bright with the joy of humiliation. "Make it 10,000. I bet she's never held one in her life." He sauntered over, leaning on false politeness like it was a cane. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't a knitting circle." Emma looked up, hazel eyes steady, and for a fraction of a second Blake's smile faltered, because he'd expected flinching, he'd expected embarrassment, and instead he saw something calm, something contained, like a locked door that doesn't rattle when you knock. "I'm just here to practice," she said. Blake recovered, because arrogance is resilient. "Practice? Honey, this is where serious shooters come. 10,000 says you can't hit the bullseye from 50 yards. "I don't have that kind of money," Emma replied, and her voice didn't shake, it just sounded tired. Blake's grin widened, smelling blood. "If you hit it, I pay. If you miss, you leave and never come back. Deal?" Rebecca Klein stepped closer, trying to salvage decency. "Mr. Hawthorne, maybe we let our guest practice." Blake cut her off with a wave. "Stay out of it, Rebecca, friendly wager." Emma's gaze dropped to her left hand, to a simple gold wedding band, and she twisted it once, a small movement that looked like nothing, yet somehow felt like a signal, like a switch being flipped in a room nobody knew existed, and she said, "All right." Blake announced it like a show. People gathered, phones lifted, whispers started, and nobody noticed the change in Emma's posture as she raised the handgun, her shoulders relaxing, her stance settling, her breathing becoming measured, the way a trained body remembers before the mind even asks why. And nobody, absolutely nobody, knew that the ring on her finger had once belonged to Master Chief Nolan Hart, a legend in United States Naval Special Operations, a man the teams called the Wraith, because he could hit targets other people couldn't even admit were there. 3 years earlier, under a gray April sky at Arlington National Cemetery, Emma had stood with a folded flag pressed to her chest and felt its weight like a verdict, the honor guard's rifles cracking in perfect rhythm, the sound too sharp for a day that already cut too deep, and she watched her husband's casket descend while the official story talked about a helicopter crash on a classified mission. Clean and vague and sealed behind redactions. The kind of truth that comes pre-packaged, so no one has to look too long at the messy edges. She'd met Nolan in Maple Crossing, Vermont, when he was visiting a wounded teammate, and she was an accountant with a life as predictable as the numbers she balanced, until one coffee shop apology turned into hours, and hours turned into a 6-month sprint toward marriage, a small ceremony, a few friends, and a handful of Nolan's fellow operators watching the room the way trained men watch rooms, because even happiness, for them, came with perimeter checks. Being married to Nolan meant learning how to live with absence, with unanswered questions, with months where the only thing she could count on was the fact that she couldn't count on anything. And when he came home, he carried new scars and old nightmares, and he'd trace her cheekbone with a calloused thumb and say, "I can't tell you everything, but I can tell you this. You're why I fight to come home." And Emma learned to accept love in fragments, in quiet mornings, in sudden laughter, in the sacred normal moments that felt like stolen time. During one stateside period, after a knee injury slowed him down, Nolan took her to a range and told her, gently, "If I'm gone, I need to know you can protect yourself." And what began as caution became ritual, because Nolan was patient, and Emma, to her own surprise, was good, not flashy good, not social media good, but calm good, the kind of good that comes from seeing clearly and refusing to panic. And Nolan would say, "Shooting isn't about aggression, it's about control," and the sessions became their wordless language, a place where grief didn't exist yet, where promises still felt safe. Then Nolan left for his final mission, and 2 days before he went, he watched her more than he shot, like he was trying to memorize her standing there alive, and he whispered, "Promise me you'll keep practicing even when I'm not here." And Emma nodded without understanding the cliff edge behind the request. After the funeral, she couldn't go back. She locked the safe. She moved to Harbor City for a fresh start. She became senior accountant Emma Hart at Meridian Ledger Group, the quiet woman who paid her taxes and kept her head down, until last week when a package arrived from Nolan's old teammate Michael Reyes, containing a day pass to the Summit Marksman Society and a note that felt like a hand on her shoulder. "Nolan would want you to keep your promise. 3 years is long enough to grieve alone. Come back to the living." So when Emma raised the handgun under Blake's smirking gaze, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about stepping back into oxygen. It was about keeping a vow that grief had tried to steal. And the moment she fired, the room narrowed into stillness, the target rolling back like time rewinding, Blake's amused expression wobbling into uncertainty as he noticed her composure. And when the paper returned with a perfect hole in the dead center, silence filled the club so completely it felt like the building had stopped breathing. Blake grabbed the target, searching for an escape hatch. Beginner's luck. Rebecca Klein couldn't hide her admiration anymore. "That was exceptional, miss." "Emma Hart," Emma said. Blake, cornered by his own wager, lunged for bigger stakes. 50,000. He announced, checkbook out like a weapon. 3 bullseyes at 75 yards. "Miss one, and you admit you cheated, and you leave." A member in the crowd, Senator Harold Keene, tried to intervene, but Blake shrugged him off, because men like Blake don't hear warnings, they hear challenges to their dominance. Emma almost walked away, because she hadn't come for a circus, but then she thought of every time she'd been made invisible, every time Nolan's sacrifice had been reduced to a folded flag and a quiet, "Thank you." Every time the world rewarded loud confidence over quiet competence, and she said, "I'll do it, but if I win, the money goes to the Sentinel Veterans Fund." Blake agreed because he couldn't imagine losing, and Emma fired, again and again and again, 3 perfect hits, each one landing like a sentence, and Blake's face drained from tan to paper as the room erupted into applause that wasn't bought, it was earned. He accused her anyway, because arrogance doesn't surrender cleanly. And when he leaned toward Rebecca Klein and threatened her job with a finger in her face, Emma watched him carefully, and then said, evenly, "If you're going to call me a cheater, let's do this formally. 1 week, 10 stations, club equipment, no excuses." Blake smiled like a man who'd just decided to cheat again, and Emma heard the crowd murmuring, and she realized she'd stepped into something larger than a wager, something that now had momentum. In the days leading up to the competition, Blake dug into Emma's past like a man tearing up floorboards looking for proof he wasn't wrong. And when his investigator finally confirmed she was Nolan's widow, that she'd been trained by the Wraith, Blake's fears sharpened into obsession, because now the narrative wasn't rich champion humiliates amateur. It was privileged icon tries to crush a fallen hero's widow. And Blake could feel the internet sharpening its knives. He could feel sponsors shifting. He could feel the floor under his kingdom begin to creak. Emma, meanwhile, didn't post, didn't brag, didn't sell her pain. She practiced quietly at a public range, and when Michael Reyes appeared at her door, worried and proud in equal measure, he told her there would be friends in the audience, people who'd served with Nolan, people who would not let her stand alone, and that mattered more than she expected. Because grief isolates you until someone reminds you that you still belong to the living. Competition day turned the club into a stadium, and Rebecca Klein moved like a woman carrying two burdens at once, professionalism and conscience, warning Emma in a low voice that she'd noticed irregularities, small adjustments to equipment that would favor someone who knew to expect them, and Emma nodded, because she'd lived long enough around men like Blake to recognize the smell of rigged games. Station after station, Blake performed like a man built for applause, while Emma performed like a woman built for reality, steady, economical, unshowy. And as the scores tightened, the crowd's energy changed, not into cruelty, but into hope, because people love an underdog until the underdog starts winning, and then they love the underdog even more, because it feels like justice visiting a room it's been banned from. By the final station, the distance was longer, the rifle more specialized, and Emma noticed subtle tampering. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough to destabilize a shooter who relied on perfect conditions. And she didn't protest, she didn't scream scandal, she adjusted calmly, the way Nolan had taught her to adapt when the world refused to be fair, and she shot with a stillness that made the room quiet again. And when her final round landed dead center, beating Blake's best, the applause hit. Like a wave, not for fame, but for the idea that quiet strength can win without becoming cruel. Blake's smile collapsed. He accused her loudly, tried to claw back power with volume. And that's when Rebecca Klein stepped forward with security footage, showing Blake's own advisor tampering with equipment, not to protect fairness, but to tilt it. And the room's mood turned instantly, because people can forgive arrogance, but they despise cheating when it's done from above. Within days, Blake faced investigations, sponsors distanced, the wager became a legal problem, and Blake's lawyers showed up with a settlement offer that doubled the donation, included a public apology, and forced him to accept suspension. And when he sat across from Emma in a neutral conference room, looking smaller in a conservative suit, he admitted, finally, that he'd built his identity on being the best, and that losing to someone who wasn't chasing trophies made him feel exposed, like his whole life had been a performance without a soul. Emma signed the settlement because her goal was never to destroy him. It was to honor Nolan, to fund veterans, to reclaim her own breath, and months later she stood inside a new training program funded by the Sentinel Veterans Fund, teaching veterans not how to become champions, but how to rebuild focus, calm, and confidence, because sometimes healing looks like controlled breathing and steady hands. Not because you're preparing for violence, but because you're preparing to live again. And here's the closure, the part that matters most. Emma didn't walk into that club to become a headline. She walked in because a dead husband asked her, in the only way dead husbands can ask, to keep a promise. And she left with something grief had withheld for 3 years, a doorway back to herself. And the sweetest part is that the people who tried to make her invisible ended up forcing her into the light, where her story could finally help others. So let me ask you the question that's going to split people, because it always does. When someone humiliates you publicly, rigs the game, and uses power to keep you in your place, is it morally right to fight back in a way that changes their life, even if you do it through rules and receipts and consequences? Or is real justice supposed to stop the moment you've proven you were right?